The mornings in Montana always smelled of rain and pine sap. Even in summer, there was a chill that crept through the screen door and brushed against my face like a cold reminder that life out here didn't forgive softness. I liked it that way. Out here, nobody cared what kind of watch you wore or how many zeros sat behind your name. The ground didn't care either. It only gave back what you worked for. That's the world I wanted my daughter Avery to grow up in. She was 6 when I adopted her, thin as a fence post, quiet as a shadow. She didn't trust easy, not after what she'd been through before me, but she was curious, always asking questions about everything. She'd follow me around the barn, little boots too big for her feet, asking why the horses chewed on the wood, why chickens fluffed their feathers, why I never took her into town much. I told her the truth, or at least part of it. I wanted her to understand the value of things before ever seeing their price. I knew one day the world would show her what money could buy, and I wanted her heart strong enough to resist it. When she was 9, she started to notice the cracks in my story. "Dad," she asked one night, "why don't we ever worry about bills like other people? You never go to a job." I remember smiling, wiping grease from my hands after fixing the generator. "Because I already worked enough for both of us," I said. She didn't buy it, not fully, but she let it go, for a while. We built our life in rhythm with the land. I taught her how to ride before she could spell her name right. I showed her how to feel the wind and predict rain just by the way the cattle moved. Sundays, we'd sit on the porch eating toast with honey, listening to the low hum of the world. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. As the years rolled by, I saw her grow restless. She'd look at the horizon like it was daring her. I recognized that look. It was the same one I had before I traded city skyscrapers for mountain ridges, and traded boardrooms for quiet. When Avery turned 23, she left for college in Seattle. I drove her there myself, truck bed loaded with boxes and books. At the dorm, she hugged me hard but quick, the way people do when they're already halfway gone. "I'll call," she said. I nodded, pretending not to notice that her eyes were dry. She did call, at first, but the city has a way of replacing voices with noise. Months turned into years, and when she finally came back for a visit, I barely recognized her. Designer jacket, manicured nails, phone always in hand. She hugged me politely the way a stranger does when they think they're supposed to. Still, I didn't say much. I just kept the fire going and made her favorite dinner. She smiled, thanked me, and told me about her new boyfriend, Mason. He worked in finance, came from a well-connected family, and as she said with a kind of pride I didn't like, he knows people. That night, after she went to bed, I walked outside, looked up at the stars, and felt something cold sink inside me. It wasn't sadness, it was knowing. Knowing that the world I tried to shield her from had finally found its way in. The next morning, she told me Mason wanted to meet me. My heart lifted for a second. Then she added, "But maybe we'll start with something small. He's very particular about appearances." That was the first time I felt the distance between us wasn't miles. It was something deeper, something bought. 3 days after she flew back to Seattle, my phone buzzed while I was under the tractor with a wrench clenched between my teeth. The text preview lit up the underside of the engine like a little square of daylight. "Dad, call me?" I wiped my hands on an old towel and stepped into the sun. The field smelled like cut alfalfa and hot iron. When I called, Avery answered on the first ring, breathless in that city way, like she'd just outrun a crossing signal. "Hey," she said. "Big news." I leaned against the fender, listening to the ticking engine cool. "I'm all ears. Mason's parents want to do a dinner. Proper introductions. They have a favorite spot downtown, very formal." She made the word last longer than it needed to, as if stretching it might make it less sharp. "Sounds fine," I said. "Tell me when to be there." Silence fluttered at the edge of the line. "There's a dress code, jacket, tie. Maybe, do you still have the navy one?" I pictured the suit hanging in the back of my closet like a mothballed secret. "I've got what I need," I said. "You tell me time and place." She exhaled. "Great. Great. I'll text you the details." Then, quick as a door closing, "Love you. Love you," I said to the empty line. Her text arrived a minute later with the coordinates of a restaurant that had its own valet line, and, if memory served, a chandelier the size of a small galaxy. I'd been there once, years back, before I shook the city out of my shoes. The kind of place where the napkins were heavy enough to use as blankets, and the water glasses never got low enough to make you nervous. I spent the afternoon in the closet, dusting off the navy suit and setting it out on the bed. The jacket still fit across the shoulders, the way a memory sometimes still fits across your heart. I shined my boots, then changed my mind and pulled the black Oxfords from a box I hadn't opened since Avery was in middle school. When I slipped them on, the leather creaked like an old friend remembering my name. Before sunset, I drove into town to the men's shop on Main. The bell over the door had the polite ding of money well spent. I bought a plain white shirt and a tie the color of storm clouds. The clerk asked if it was for a wedding. I told him it was for a meeting that might decide one. He laughed, not sure if he should. Back at the farm, I showered, shaved, and stood in the bathroom mirror while the last light slid off the mountains. The man looking back at me had lines cut deep by weather and worry. His hair, once coal dark, had given in at the temples. I tightened the knot at my throat and let the silk bite just a little. It felt honest to be uncomfortable. Halfway down the gravel drive, my phone buzzed again. New message from Avery. Hey, one more thing. Could you maybe drop me off a block away and we'll meet inside? Traffic is weird and it's just easier for the host to seat us. I pulled onto the shoulder and let the truck idle. The engine's rumble filled the cab like a warning. I read the text twice. Just easier for the host. I knew that trick. I used it when I wanted a problem to arrive without a face. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I typed "I raised you to sit where you belong," then deleted it. I typed "I'll see you at the table" and kept it. Downtown had changed since I'd last let it see me. The streets were cleaner, the buildings taller, the windows glossier. The restaurant's awning stretched out like a velvet handshake. A valet in a black vest jogged toward my truck, then slowed when he saw the make and the dust. I handed him the keys anyway. Money doesn't announce itself out here unless you make it. I never have. Inside, the air was cold the way only expensive air can be. Lemon peel, charred steak, a whisper of truffle. Smells layered like a man's resume. A host with perfect hair asked for a name. I gave him Avery's. He checked a screen and smiled the way people learn to smile when tips depend on it. They hadn't arrived yet. I stood near the bar, watching silhouettes swirl into seats, watching hands describe numbers in mid-air. My reflection in the mirror behind the whiskey bottles looked like a ghost who'd wandered into the wrong decade. I ordered sparkling water and let it sting my tongue. Avery texted again. Almost there. Mason's parents are particular. Please, just follow my lead. I slid the phone back into my pocket and stared at my hands. The knuckles scarred pale where fences had argued with me. Those same hands once signed papers that moved millions, acquired towers, shielded people I cared about from storms they never knew were coming. Hands tell the truth when mouths can't. I turned toward the entrance just as the door sighed open and the night spilled them in. Avery, sharp and star-bright. Mason, tan and tailored. And behind them a couple who wore ease like armor. She saw me first. Relief crossed her face. Then something else. Calculation, maybe. The kind that measures distance in dollars. I lifted a hand. She smiled, quick and professional. "Dad," she said when they reached me, "you made it." "I said I would," I answered, feeling the knot of my tie cinch tighter. "Shall we?" Mason's mother asked, already angled toward the dining room, already claiming the air. We followed the host past tables that glowed like little planets. My boots were quiet on the carpet. The chandelier above us scattered light across my sleeve in broken coins. We took our seats, linen crisp as judgment. The server appeared with water and expectations. I folded my napkin, set it in my lap, and took a slow breath of the chilled room. All right, I thought, meeting Avery's eyes for a heartbeat that felt like a warning bell. Let's see what a table costs tonight. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the rooster and the ache in my back that came from years of lifting more than I should. Sunlight was barely crawling across the fields when I remembered Avery's last message. Just follow my lead. I made coffee the old way, boiling it on the stove till it smelled like burnt bark and comfort. I sat at the table staring out the window at the frost still clinging to the fence posts, wondering what kind of world turned manners into masks. I told myself she was just nervous. Young love, rich in mistakes. But deep down, I knew something else was at play. When people start talking about appearances, it's never about kindness. It's about distance, about who they don't want to be mistaken for. I drove into town later to get her flowers. Nothing fancy, just daffodils from the local florist, bright and loud as morning. I thought they'd remind her of the ones that used to grow wild behind the barn every spring, the ones she'd pick for the kitchen table as a girl. The florist, an old friend named Doris, wrapped them in brown paper and said, "Your girl's doing well out there, huh?" I smiled. "She's doing something." Doris looked up at me over her glasses. "You sound like you're not sure that's the same thing." I just nodded and paid. That night, before leaving for the dinner, I stood by the truck a long while. The farm was quiet except for the horses shifting in their stalls. The air carried the smell of hay and snowmelt. Home, in all its humble glory. I wondered what Avery would think if she looked at this place now. Would she see hard work, or just the absence of luxury? Halfway to the city, my phone buzzed again. Another text. "Dad, just to be clear, please don't mention the farm too much tonight. They're old-fashioned. They might not understand your lifestyle." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because it hurt in a way I hadn't felt in years. My lifestyle. As if I'd chosen this for lack of something better. I pulled into a gas station and parked beneath a flickering light. I read the message again, then typed back, "Understood." But the truth was, I didn't understand. Not really. How could a daughter I raised to value honesty be so afraid of it now? By the time I reached downtown, the city had swallowed the horizon. Towers stabbed at the dusk, their windows glowing like judgmental eyes. The restaurant stood at the corner, its golden lights reflecting off polished cars. The valets moved like trained birds, wings of black vests fluttering as they opened doors for people who never looked at them. Inside, I saw her before she saw me. Avery was standing by the hostess stand, talking to a man and woman who looked like they'd stepped out of a portrait of wealth. Her back was straight, her smile careful, her laugh rehearsed. She looked grown, but not grounded. When her eyes finally found mine, something flickered in her expression. Not happiness, not surprise. Something else. Concern. "Dad," she said, walking up, voice soft, "you look great." I held out the daffodils. "Brought you something." She froze, then smiled like a politician. "Oh, that's sweet. Maybe I'll leave them in the car so they don't get in the way." Mason appeared beside her, sharp suit, confident grin. "Mr. Carter," he said, shaking my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." "Likewise." His handshake was strong but hollow, the kind that tells you he's only counting how long till he can let go. Mason's parents arrived a minute later. His father gave a curt nod. His mother didn't offer her hand at all. "Avery's told us so much about you," she said. "You must be proud of how far she's come." "Every mile of it," I said. We were led to the table. I noticed Avery's shoulders tighten as we walked, as if each step deeper into that chandeliered room pulled her further from who she used to be. As the menus opened and the conversation began, I started to see the cracks between us widen. Every question from Mason's parents was a test, and every answer from Avery was an apology for where she came from. By the end of the appetizers, I knew I was there to be tolerated, not welcomed. Still, I bit my tongue. I'd taught her patience. Maybe it was time to show I still had some left. But somewhere deep down, between the burn of my coffee that morning and the cold hum of their laughter now, a truth settled in my chest like a warning. If she's ashamed of her roots tonight, she'll spend the rest of her life running from them. And I wasn't sure I'd chase her this time. The valet's eyes flicked from my dusty truck to the gleaming cars around it like he was trying to solve a riddle that didn't make sense. He hesitated before opening my door, then caught himself and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I handed him the keys without a word, slipped a few bills into his palm, and straightened my tie as I looked up at the restaurant. It was called the Silver Parlor, the kind of place that pretends to be humble by hiding luxury behind dim lights and polite whispers. A doorman opened the glass door with a practiced nod, and warm air rolled out, expensive perfume, garlic butter, and polished wood. Inside, the chandeliers were low enough to make the gold on the walls look like candlelight. People spoke in soft tones, the kind of quiet that costs money. A pianist in the corner played something old and slow. I didn't belong there. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I didn't care to. A hostess appeared, all smiles and symmetry. "Good evening, sir. Name?" "Avery Carter," I said. "She's expecting me." Her eyes darted to the tablet in her hand. "Ah, yes, the Mason party. They've just arrived. Follow me, please." As we weaved through the tables, I saw Avery before she saw me. She stood near a curved booth with a man who could have been carved from money itself. Tall, immaculate, and with that air of quiet ownership. His parents flanked him like bookends of judgment. Avery wore a silver dress that shimmered like frost under the lights. Her hair was pinned in a way I'd never seen, like she was trying to look older, wealthier, safer. When her eyes finally caught mine, I watched her expression shift. First relief, then embarrassment, then the same polite smile she used on store clerks. "Dad," she said, walking toward me, her voice almost too bright. "You made it." "I said I would," I replied. My eyes flicked toward Mason and his parents. "You must be the family I've heard so much about." Mason's father stood but didn't extend a hand. "Richard Callahan," he said, like it was supposed to mean something. His wife Ellen smiled thinly, her pearls catching the light. Mason stepped forward and shook my hand with a grip that was all posture. "Sir, it's an honor." I nodded. "The honor's in the eye of the beholder." We all sat. The hostess handed out menus printed on paper so thick it could have doubled as cardboard. A waiter appeared, silent as a ghost, filling our glasses before we asked. I watched Avery's fingers fidget with the corner of her napkin. She hadn't done that since she was a kid, back when she used to twist her sleeves when she was scared. "So," Ellen said, her tone light but pointed, "Avery tells us you live out by the mountains?" "That's right," I said. "Little farm outside Bozeman. Nothing fancy, but it keeps me busy." "Oh," she replied, nodding once, her smile soft but her eyes sharp. "That's quaint." Mason's father leaned in. "Must be peaceful living that way. I imagine you don't have much need for, the modern world." "I have what I need," I said, "and more peace than most people can buy." Avery's cheeks flushed. "Dad, they mean—" "I know what they mean," I said gently. Mason cleared his throat. "Avery's always said you're very grounded." "That's a nice word for it," Ellen murmured, sipping her wine. I smiled. "Grounded's a good thing. Keeps you from being swept away." For a moment no one spoke. The pianist played something new, soft and melancholy. I took a sip of water and looked at my daughter. She was trying to hold it all together. This image she'd built. This world she thought she wanted to belong to. But her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker of shame there. And it wasn't for them. It was for me. I'd seen that look before. In boardrooms years ago when men with no backbone tried to pretend they had one. I'd left that world behind to make sure she'd never have to. Yet here we were, back in the same dance, only now she was the one leading it. The waiter returned to take our orders. I went last. "Just steak," I said. "Medium, no sauce." Ellen's lips twitched. "Simple tastes," she said softly. "Simple," I agreed. "And satisfying." Through the rest of the meal, the questions came dressed as conversation. Where did I go to school? What did I do before farming? Had I always lived in Montana? Each answer I gave seemed to make Avery shrink a little more. When I mentioned I'd once worked in finance, her eyes darted up in surprise. I could see her trying to stitch together the gaps in her story of me. Finally, dessert menus arrived, and Ellen laughed lightly. "Perhaps next time, we'll host somewhere more suitable for everyone." That word again, suitable. It slid across the table like a cold knife. Avery looked at me, her throat tight. "Dad," she whispered, "maybe we can talk later." I nodded, folding my napkin. "Of course." When the waiter brought the check, Mason reached for it, but his father stopped him. "We've got this," he said. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I stood, thanked them for the meal, and turned to Avery. "I'll wait for you outside." Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. I walked through the dining room, past the chandeliers and whispers, past the polite faces that looked right through me. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. I took off my tie, loosened my collar, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She'd built herself a new world, but standing there, watching the restaurant lights spill across the street, I couldn't help but wonder, was she building a life or a lie? The cold hit me first. Not the kind that bites your skin, but the kind that seeps in slow. The kind that starts in your chest and settles deep, like disappointment made of ice. The restaurant doors swung open behind me, spilling laughter and jazz into the street. Avery and Mason stepped out a few minutes later, their silhouettes framed by the gold light. Mason's arm was looped around her waist like possession disguised as affection. His parents followed, still talking, still smiling. "Dad?" Avery said softly as she walked up, her breath clouding the air. "I'm sorry it was such a long dinner. You didn't have to wait. I said I would," I replied. My hands were in my pockets, my tie still loose, my patience wearing thin. Ellen Callahan looked me over again, her polite smile sharper now. "Avery, dear, we're heading home. It was so nice to meet your father." She said it like a final judgment. "Nice to meet him. Now let's never repeat it." "Pleasure's mine," I said, offering a nod. She didn't bother returning it. They turned toward their car, a black sedan that gleamed under the streetlights. Mason followed his parents, then paused, looking at Avery. "You coming?" She hesitated. "I'll catch up." He shrugged and climbed in. The door shut with that heavy, expensive sound of separation. When they drove off, the city felt bigger, colder. Avery stood beside me, arms crossed over her chest. "They liked you," she said weakly. I chuckled. "Sure they did. Just like people like a storm they can see coming but know will pass soon." Her face fell. "Dad, please don't start." "I'm not starting, sweetheart," I said quietly. "Just finishing what they couldn't say out loud." She looked away, eyes on the wet pavement. "They're just particular. They don't mean anything by it." "Of course they do," I said. "People always mean something when they measure others." She exhaled sharply. "You don't understand how things work here. Mason's family. They have expectations. Appearances matter. Connections matter. I can't afford to—" "To what?" I interrupted. "Be proud of where you came from?" Her silence was answer enough. "You think the dirt under my nails embarrasses you, don't you?" I said, my voice lower now. "You think a man who fixes his own fences and grows his own food doesn't belong in your world anymore." "That's not fair," she snapped, tears flashing in her eyes. "You don't know the pressure I'm under. You live out there in the quiet, pretending none of this matters. But it does. People judge. They whisper. Mason's career depends on pretending?" I cut in. "On hiding the truth?" She shook her head. "You don't get it. You don't know what it's like to have to fight your way into a place like this." I took a step closer. "Avery, I built places like this." She froze. "What?" But I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Not yet. "Go on," I said softly. "Don't keep Mason waiting. Wouldn't want to give him the wrong impression." She flinched, guilt flashing across her face. "Dad!" I sighed and handed her the daffodils I'd been holding since I left the restaurant. Their petals were wilted now, the stems bent from the cold. "I brought these for you," I said. "They reminded me of home." She took them hesitantly, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. I gave her a small smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't thank me. Just don't forget where they grow." She looked down, silent. Then, almost defensively, "Mason's parents don't mean any harm. They just expect certain things." "I get it," I said. "They want what's best. For him. For us," she corrected. "No," I said firmly. "For them." She looked up at me then, her lip trembling slightly. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "Just honest. There's a difference." For a long moment neither of us spoke. The streetlight buzzed above us, flickering every few seconds like an old film reel. Cars hissed by, their tires slicing through puddles. Somewhere down the block, a bus wheezed to a stop, then groaned away again. Finally she said, "I'll call you later, okay?" I nodded. "Sure." She turned and walked toward the car waiting at the corner. I watched her climb in, her silver dress flashing once beneath the lights before the door closed. The car pulled away, its taillights fading into the dark. I stood there for a long while after she was gone, My breath came out slow, heavy. Somewhere behind me, the valet shifted uncomfortably, waiting for me to leave. When I finally got back into my truck, the seat was cold, and the daffodil's scent lingered faintly in the air. I started the engine, but before I drove off, I looked one last time at the restaurant, the place where my daughter had measured my worth by the eyes of strangers. That was the first cut. Not deep enough to bleed out, but sharp enough to warn me. The world she wanted wasn't built for men like me. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd built it anyway. And if I had to, I could break it too. When I got home that night, I didn't bother taking off my jacket. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, the only glow coming from the moon pressing through the window over the sink. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that stretches too long. The daffodils lay across the counter, half dead and folded over, like they'd given up trying to be seen. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, not to forget, just to remember clearly. Every look, every word from that dinner replayed in my mind, polished and sharp like glass shards in a box. The next morning, I went out to the barn before sunrise. The air smelled like damp soil and hay. I worked until sweat cut through the dust on my neck. Work has a way of making the noise go quiet. By the time the sun hit the fields, I'd nearly convinced myself to let it go. She was grown, I told myself. Her choices weren't mine anymore. But that lie didn't hold long. A week passed before she called again. It was a Friday night. I was fixing the gutter when my phone buzzed. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice tentative. I wanted to say sorry. For the other night, I wiped my hands on a rag, leaned against the wall, and let her talk. "It's just Mason's parents. They're old-fashioned. They think certain circles should stay together, you know? They don't understand people who—" "Work?" I asked, cutting her off gently. She hesitated. "They just see life differently." I didn't want to make it harder on Mason. He's trying to make a good impression at his firm. "Right," I said. "Wouldn't want to tarnish his shine." She sighed. "Dad, don't be like that. You raised me better than to start fights. I raised you to finish them," I said quietly, "and to stand for something worth fighting for." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "You don't know how hard it is here. Everyone's watching, judging. It's not like back home where you can just be yourself and no one cares." I smiled sadly. "That's why I stayed here, sweetheart. Because people who mind their own lives are happier than people who mind everyone else's." She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the hum of city traffic through her phone. Then she said, "They're hosting another dinner next week. Mason thinks it'd be best if you didn't come this time, just to smooth things over." I let that hang in the air. "I see. It's not personal," she added quickly. "They just think, well, it might be easier for everyone." Easier. That word again. The coward's word. "I understand," I said slowly. "But let me ask you something. When you were little and scared to jump off the dock into the lake, what did I tell you?" She hesitated. "You told me, nothing easy is worth doing." I nodded. "And I meant it." "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't make this harder." "I won't," I said softly. "You already did." We ended the call in silence. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the fields. The horizon glowed orange, and a hawk circled above the far hill. By Monday, I had made up my mind. I drove into town and stopped by the feed store, but not for supplies. The owner, Jack, had been my friend for decades. We'd worked together back in the day, before either of us decided that quiet was more valuable than noise. He looked up from the counter. "You all right, Carter? You look like a man polishing a knife." I chuckled. "Maybe I am." Jack raised a brow. "This about that girl of yours?" "Yeah," I said. "She's forgotten what her last name stands for." Jack leaned back, whistling low. "Can't say I'm surprised. City's got long arms, reaches right into your bones if you let it." "Not mine," I said. I walked out, climbed back into my truck, and sat there with the engine running. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield. A man dressed plain, but with eyes that had seen more power than most men could imagine. See, long before I ever planted my first seed in Montana soil, I'd planted my name in boardrooms, stock charts, and contracts across the country. I'd built companies that people like Mason's father depended on. My name wasn't public, not anymore. But my influence still lingered like roots underground, quiet, unseen, and impossible to pull out. Avery had no idea who I really was. And maybe that was my mistake. I thought keeping her away from that world would keep her pure. Turns out, it just left her vulnerable to people who worshipped what I walked away from. As I drove home, I decided that if the world wanted to judge me, they'd soon learn the full measure of the man they'd turned away. But I wouldn't do it for pride. I'd do it for her, to remind her that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. When I parked by the house, the wind had picked up, bending the wheat in smooth, rippling waves. It reminded me of a lesson I once told her when she was small. The wind always tests what's rooted and what's just planted. I think it was time she learned that again. The next Friday, I sat by the phone waiting for a call that never came. Avery had said Mason's parents were hosting dinner again, and deep down, I knew she wouldn't invite me. But I still waited. Habit, I guess. Hope, maybe. The kind that lingers even after you've told yourself you're done hoping. The farm was too quiet that night. The crickets sounded like they were whispering about me. I walked out onto the porch, bottle in hand, and watched the horizon fade from orange to deep blue. Somewhere, in a high-rise wrapped in glass, my daughter was probably lifting her wine glass, laughing at a joke that wasn't funny. I told myself I didn't care. I'd built my peace in the dirt, and she'd chosen her world of silk and shine. But when I saw her name light up my phone around 10 p.m., I picked up on the first ring. "Dad?" she said, her voice low, like she was whispering from a bathroom. "Can you talk?" "Always," I said, sitting back down. "How's the dinner?" A pause, then a sigh. "It's fine. Mason's parents, they're just being themselves. It's exhausting." "Funny," I said. "You sound more tired than proud." She laughed quietly, bitterly. "You're not wrong." There was shuffling, like she was walking down a hallway. "Listen, Dad," she said softly. "I didn't tell you something. Mason's parents, they didn't want you there because they think, well, they think you wouldn't fit in." I didn't speak, just listened. "They said it would complicate things," she went on, her voice breaking. "They don't understand how I could come from," she hesitated, "from you. They think you're not refined enough." That one landed, clean and deep. "Not refined enough," I repeated, tasting the words like a bad whiskey. "Did you tell them who I am?" "I told them you raised me alone, that you worked hard," she said quickly. "But they don't care about that, Dad. They only care about reputation, influence, family names. They said appearances matter more than sincerity." I laughed softly. "Well, then they must be very sincere people." "Dad, please don't," she whispered. "They're just old money. You know how it is." "Yeah," I said. "I know exactly how it is." There was silence for a long time. I could hear the faint murmur of voices in the background, the clinking of crystal. Then Avery said, "They think Mason might get a better opportunity if he keeps a certain image." "Meaning?" "Meaning, maybe not introducing me to you just yet. They said they'll warm up to the idea." Something cold settled in my gut. "So I'm an idea now," I said. "Dad?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I get it. They don't think I'm good enough for their table." She didn't respond. Just the sound of her breath, shallow, shaking. "You know what's funny, sweetheart?" I said finally. "People like that used to work for me. Men like Mason's father. They'd wait outside my office for 5 minutes of my time, hoping I'd sign something that'd make their whole year. And now my own daughter is ashamed to sit next to me." Her breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth," I said. "You've been dining with ghosts, Avery, and you don't even realize one of them is eating off a plate I bought." She went quiet, then whispered, "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good," I said. "Maybe it's time someone did." "What's he? Why are you saying all this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why now?" "Because I let you think money came from comfort," I said. "But it comes from sacrifice, from pain, from knowing when to walk away from people who measure worth by what they can see. I didn't raise you to be one of them." "I'm not," she said quickly, but there was no conviction in it. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I'll tell you something, Avery. When I first brought you home, you were scared of everything. The dark, the barn, even your own shadow. But you learned. You faced it. You grew strong. Don't you dare let these people make you small again. Dad, she started, her voice trembling. Go enjoy your dinner, I said, cutting her off gently. And tell Mason's parents they don't have to worry. They'll never have to see me again. Dad, wait! But I hung up before she could finish. I set the phone down on the table, stared at it for a long moment, and let the quiet swallow the house again. They thought I wasn't good enough. They didn't know I'd built half the world they lived in. But soon, they would, and so would she. It was raining when I drove into the city again. The kind of steady, deliberate rain that seemed to wash off pretense, if you were honest enough to let it. The wipers squeaked back and forth as I watched headlights blur into silver trails on the highway. I didn't know exactly what I planned to do. Maybe I just needed to see it for myself. To see her new life. To see the world that thought I wasn't good enough to enter. By the time I reached downtown, the streets shone like mirrors. Umbrellas dotted the sidewalks, and people rushed from one bright doorway to the next, clutching handbags and phone screens like armor. I parked the truck half a block from Mason's family's high-rise, 40 stories of glass and ego stabbing into the clouds. I stepped out, no umbrella, rain soaking through my jacket in seconds. A doorman under a gold awning eyed me, hesitated, then straightened. Can I help you, sir? Just visiting, I said, walking past him. He looked uncertain, but I kept moving. I didn't belong in that lobby, and that was exactly why I walked through it anyway. The marble floor gleamed like it had been polished by guilt itself. A grand chandelier hung over a fountain that didn't need to exist. I saw her before she saw me. Avery standing by the elevator, wearing a beige coat that cost more than my truck, her phone pressed to her ear. Mason stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, the other scrolling through messages. When she finally noticed me, her eyes widened, and I saw panic flicker there. Dad? She said, lowering her phone. What are you passing through? I said. Thought I'd say hello. Mason turned, his expression neutral. Mr. Carter, everything all right? Everything's fine, I said, studying him. He was the kind of man who thought manners could hide weakness. Just thought I'd check in on my daughter. Avery forced a smile. You could have called first. I did, I said evenly. But calls seem to lose their way around here. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The doorman cleared his throat somewhere behind me. Mason gave a polite laugh that died too early. Well, it's good to see you. We're just heading to dinner with my parents again. I nodded slowly. Of course you are. Avery stepped forward, lowering her voice. Dad, please. This isn't the time. Seems like it never is, I said. Her jaw tightened. Can we talk outside, please? We stepped back out into the rain, standing under the awning while the city rushed by in silver sheets. The noise of the traffic filled the silence between us. She crossed her arms, eyes pleading. What are you doing here? Making sure my daughter still remembers my face, I said. Last time we talked, you sounded like you were about to erase me. Her voice cracked. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, cutting her off. You think if you pretend hard enough, they'll let you in. But they never will, Avery. They'll just take pieces of you until there's nothing left. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. You don't know them like I do. I know them better than you think, I said, my tone turning cold. People like Mason's parents have been sitting across from me my entire life. They use words like legacy and pedigree, while their hands shake under the table because they're terrified someone will realize how small they really are. She looked stunned, as if she'd just seen me clearly for the first time. What are you saying? I'm saying I built this world before you ever dreamed of walking into it, I said quietly. The companies that fund Mason's family's projects, the banks that keep their lights on, they're mine, or at least they were once. I let them have their thrones because I thought I was done ruling, but maybe I retired too soon. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. Dad, she finally whispered, why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to have what I never did, freedom from money's poison. But now I see you've been drinking it anyway, just in prettier glasses. The rain ran down her face, mixing with her tears. You're scaring me, she said softly. Good, I said, because fear can wake a person up. For a long time we just stood there. The city roared around us, horns, sirens, footsteps, but we might as well have been alone. She looked at me like she didn't know whether to hug me or run. Finally, she said, "I have to go. Mason's waiting." "Then go," I said, stepping back. "But remember something, Avery. The world you're trying so hard to impress belongs to men like me, and men like me don't stay quiet forever." She turned, hesitating only once before disappearing into the lobby again. I watched her reflection vanish in the glass doors, then walked back into the rain. My boots splashed through puddles as I crossed the street, every step heavier than the last. I didn't feel anger. I felt purpose. They thought they could look down on me. They forgot who built the floor they were standing on. The rain hadn't stopped by the time I made it back to the farm. It drummed against the roof like 1,000 clocks ticking down to something inevitable. I sat by the window for hours, watching the drops streak down the glass, tracing lines like decisions I couldn't take back. I didn't sleep that night. Too many ghosts pacing the halls of my head. The ghosts of the man I used to be, the one I'd buried out here beneath dirt and humility. The world had taken my kindness for weakness, and I had let it, until now. By morning, I'd made my choice. I pulled out an old metal box from the attic, the one Avery had never seen. Inside were the pieces of my old life, leather-bound notebooks, folded contracts, a gold pen, and a keycard to an office in Manhattan that probably still bore my name in the fine print. Jonathan Carter, founder and majority shareholder of Carter Holdings Group. A name the business world whispered when it wanted a deal done quietly, or undone violently. I'd stepped away 15 years ago, left the skyscrapers and the backroom politics to the vultures who'd once called me partner. I traded the sound of closing deals for the sound of wind through pine trees. It wasn't retirement, it was penance. But the past has a habit of knocking when you least expect it. I dusted off the notebooks and started making calls. Old numbers, old allies, men who owed me favors they'd never been asked to repay. Some were surprised to hear my voice, others weren't. One of them, Robert Haynes, picked up on the first ring. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Carter, I thought you went off to grow tomatoes or something." "Something like that," I said. "Listen, I need to know who's running the Callahan accounts these days." A low whistle on the other end. "Still got a personal grudge, huh? Let's call it curiosity." He gave a short laugh. "Last I checked, they were tangled in that Atlas Capital deal. You remember Atlas? We bought them out back in '05. "I remember." I smiled faintly. "Who's their current lender?" "Bank of Northern Plains," he said, "which, if memory serves, still has your fingerprints on the board." "Good," I said. "Then they'll take my call." "Carter?" His tone shifted. "What are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I said, and meant it. "Just a correction." He hesitated. "You always did like the long game." "Still do," I replied. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Not happy, but alive, like an old machine sputtering back to life after years of silence. By noon, I was in my study, laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting off the bourbon in my glass. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I just wanted the world to remember who I was, so that the next time someone told my daughter her father wasn't good enough, they'd know the truth of what those words cost. I sent 3 emails that day. The first went to an old contact at the bank, the second to a managing partner at Atlas, and the third to Mason's father himself. Short, precise, and unmistakably polite. "Mr. Callahan, we haven't spoken, but I believe you're familiar with my name. You may want to review your portfolio allocations and debt structures within the next 72 hours. I understand your family office holds shares connected to entities under Carter Holdings' silent management. You'll find those terms subject to change. Warm regards, Jonathan Carter." I didn't expect a reply. People like Callahan don't respond right away. They call their lawyers first, their bankers second, and their gods last. When the sun finally set, I walked out to the porch with a cup of coffee. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I wasn't the quiet farmer in worn boots anymore. I was the man I used to be, the man who built empires and ended careers with a single sentence. Still, I didn't do this to hurt Avery. I did it because love has sharp edges when it's honest. I wanted her to see the truth for herself, that wealth without humility is rot, and pride without gratitude is poverty. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. Unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end was tight, clipped. "This is Richard Callahan. I think we need to talk." I smiled. "I imagine we do." And in that quiet moment, standing barefoot on the porch as dawn broke over the fields, I realized something. I could have told Avery everything years ago, but she wouldn't have understood then. Now she would. The reveal wasn't for him. It was for her, and it was just getting started. Callahan's voice over the phone that morning sounded like an expensive engine running out of oil. Still powerful, but beginning to grind. He tried to steady it, but I could hear the panic just under the surface. Men like him only sound that way when their kingdom starts to shift beneath their feet. "Mr. Carter," he began, "I think there's been some confusion." "There's always confusion," I said, watching the steam rise from my coffee. "That's how people like you stay rich, while everyone else stays confused." He chuckled, thin and forced. "Look, I respect your reputation, but this little email stunt—" "It's not a stunt," I said, cutting him off. "It's a reminder." He went silent. I could almost hear him swallow. I let the pause stretch. The kind of silence that makes powerful men start talking again, just to fill it. "Whatever issue there is," he said finally, "we can discuss it rationally. You're a businessman. You understand optics." "Optics," I repeated. "That's what you said about me, isn't it? When you told your son's fiancé that her father wasn't good enough to sit at your table." Another pause. Longer this time. Then a sigh, low and measured. "Ah, so that's what this is about." "Don't flatter yourself, Callahan," I said. "This isn't about pride. It's about teaching a lesson I should have taught my daughter years ago." He tried to laugh it off. "You can't hold me responsible for—" "I'm not holding you responsible," I said, my voice cold now. "I'm holding you accountable." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I leaned back in the chair, staring out the window at the pasture, where the early light rolled over the frost like a silver tide. There's a peace in power when you no longer need it. That's what Callahan didn't understand. I wasn't fighting for dominance. I was setting things right. By noon, the phone calls began. First from the bank, then from my old partners. Words like liquidity, asset freeze, restructuring. The polite way of saying, someone important just started tugging the right strings. I didn't touch a thing myself. I didn't need to. The men who still respected me did the rest. They remembered the Carter name, remembered what it meant when I said, "Enough." By evening, Atlas Capital had paused its deal with the Callahan family. A few of their smaller ventures suddenly found their lines of credit under review. The ripple effect began. I knew Avery would hear about it soon. That was the point. The next night she showed up at the farm unannounced. Her car skidded up the gravel drive, headlights cutting through the mist. When she stepped out, her heels sank in the dirt. She didn't care. "Dad!" she shouted, storming toward me as I stepped out of the barn. "What the hell did you do?" Her hair was damp from rain, her eyes blazing. She looked beautiful in her anger, alive again, not polished and hollow like she'd been. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, let her words fall between us like the raindrops that had started again. "Mason's family is in chaos," she said. "Deals are collapsing, accounts frozen. They said you were behind it." "Maybe they just had bad luck," I said, voice calm. "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't play dumb. They said you sent them an email that you—" She stopped, catching her breath, then whispered, "Who are you?" I walked closer until I could see my reflection in her eyes. "I'm your father," I said. "The same man who fixed your bike, built your treehouse, taught you to look a person in the eye when you speak." "That's not what I mean," she said. Callahan said you used to own half the companies his family does business with." I smiled faintly. "Used to? That's generous of him." Her mouth fell open. "So it's true. It's true I built things," I said. "And when I was done, I left it all behind so you could grow up knowing how to earn something without it owning you." She looked away, shaking her head. "You humiliated them. You humiliated me." "No," I said. "They did that themselves. I just turned the lights on." Her voice broke. Why couldn't you just let me handle it? Why did you have to destroy everything? Destroy? I stepped closer. Avery, I didn't destroy anything. I revealed it. The moment someone's power depends on others not knowing the truth, that's not power. It's fraud. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't get it, Dad. This isn't your world anymore. You can't just pull strings and expect everyone to watch me, I said quietly. She stared at me then, the fury fading into something else. Fear, confusion, maybe even awe. What are you trying to prove? I'm not proving anything, I said. I'm teaching you something. About money, about pride, about what happens when you forget the cost of the ground you're standing on. Her lips trembled. And what if I already learned it? Then this ends here, I said softly. The rain picked up, soaking us both. She looked at me one last time, her mascara streaking down her cheeks like ink on a wet page. You're not the man I thought you were, she whispered. I smiled, a tired smile. No, I said. I'm the man who raised you to see both sides of the mirror. The one who taught you that reflection means nothing if you don't know what's behind it. She turned and walked back to her car, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered even after she'd driven off into the night. I stood there in the rain, breathing slow, my heart steady. It wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning, and it was only the beginning. The morning after Avery stormed off, the farm was silent, not peaceful, just empty. Even the horses seemed uneasy, shifting in their stalls, as if they sensed the tension I'd left hanging in the air. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving puddles across the yard that caught the pale dawn light like cracked mirrors. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but it tasted bitter. Maybe because I finally knew what it felt like to wound someone you love for their own good. I'd told myself it was a lesson. That pain sometimes taught what pride never could. But sitting there at that table, listening to the wind rattle the windows, I wasn't sure if I believed it anymore. By noon, the phone started ringing again. Reporters, partners, old colleagues, everybody wanted a quote from Jonathan Carter, the ghost who'd come back swinging. I ignored them all. I didn't want fame or attention. I wanted silence, and for my daughter to understand. But instead of Avery, it was Mason who came first. He arrived unannounced, pulling up in a spotless SUV that looked absurd against the mud-streaked fence line. I was splitting wood out back when I heard the tires crunch on gravel. "Mr. Carter," he called, stepping out, adjusting his expensive coat like it was armor. I didn't stop working. "You must be lost," I said, raising the axe again. He hesitated, then walked closer. "I came to talk." "I noticed," I said, bringing the axe down with a solid crack that split the log clean in two. He flinched at the sound. "Look, whatever bad blood there is between you and my father, it's affecting more people than you realize." "That's so?" I leaned on the handle. "You'll forgive me if my sympathy's a little out of shape. Your actions caused real damage," he pressed. "Accounts frozen, deals suspended. People are losing money. People like you," I said flatly. He exhaled, clearly trying to stay calm. "You made your point. You proved you're powerful. But you're destroying Avery's future in the process. Don't you care about that?" That one landed, and he knew it. I looked him over. Perfect posture, perfect grooming, perfect fear hiding behind all that polish. I saw myself in him decades ago. Before I learned that power without empathy just makes you hollow. "You think this is about power?" I asked. He frowned. "Isn't it?" "No," I said. "It's about humility. Something your family could use a little more of." He laughed, a humorless, brittle sound. "You think this is humility? You've humiliated us." "No," I said. "You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided my daughter's worth was measured in stock options and social circles." His jaw tightened. "Avery's heart is breaking over this." That one hurt worse than I expected. I set the axe down and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Good," I said quietly. "Hearts that never break don't grow." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "You're cruel." "Cruel is pretending to love someone while judging where they came from," I said. "Cruel is letting a good woman think she needs to erase her roots to be worthy of your name." He didn't answer. Just stood there, lips pressed tight, the silence between us stretching long and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "You've made your point. So what now? Now? I said. Now you all sit with it. You feel it. You remember it next time you look down on someone who built their own life instead of inheriting it. He nodded once, then turned toward his car. But before he left, he stopped and said quietly, "You know, Avery still loves you. She's just lost." I looked out across the pasture. "We all get lost," I said. "The trick is remembering where home is." When he drove off, I stood there watching the dust settle behind him. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain and earth. I felt older than I had in years. That night, as I was closing up the barn, I heard another engine in the distance. I thought Mason had come back, but it was Avery. Her headlights cut across the field, and when she stepped out of the car, I saw something had changed. Her face was softer, her voice smaller. "Dad," she said, walking toward me. "I don't know what to say." "You could start with hello," I said gently. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Everything's falling apart. Mason's parents won't speak to him. He might lose his position. They're blaming me." I took off my gloves and looked at her. "It's not your fault. It's mine. For letting you think their approval mattered." Tears filled her eyes. "What did you do?" "I reminded them of gravity," I said simply. "They thought they were floating. I just brought them back to Earth." She shook her head. "I don't know whether to thank you or hate you." "Both are fair," I said. She let out a broken laugh and wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. "You've ruined everything." "No," I said softly. "I've cleared the ground. Now you get to decide what to plant next." She looked at me for a long time, her breath catching in the cold air. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "I'm asking you to understand." She turned away, staring out at the dark horizon. "I just wanted to make you proud." I swallowed hard. "You already did. You just forgot how." She stood there in silence for a while, then whispered, "I don't know where to go from here." I put a hand on her shoulder. "Then start here," I said. "Start home." For the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away. The storm was finally breaking, but not the way either of us expected. Avery stayed the night. She didn't plan to. She just never left. We sat in silence at the kitchen table, the same one where she used to color outside the lines and ask if cows ever got lonely. Now she was older, sharper, but there was that same lostness in her eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said finally. "Trying to build something, trying to fit in." "You were building on sand," I said gently. "It always looks solid, until the first wave hits." She stared at the mug in her hands, tracing the rim with her thumb. "Mason says he's not sure what happens next. His parents told him to choose." I leaned back, heart heavy. "Between money and love?" She nodded. I sighed. "Then you already have your answer. Any man who needs to think about it doesn't deserve the one who doesn't." Her eyes filled, but she held her chin high. I saw strength there, the same quiet defiance she had as a child, the kind that made me proud and terrified all at once. She looked at me. "You taught me to fight, but you also taught me to be kind. I don't know which one I'm supposed to be right now." "Both," I said. "Kind to yourself, hard on your illusions." We didn't talk much after that. The house creaked with the wind, the smell of rain still hanging in the air. Before bed, she stopped by the door and said, "I miss who I was when I lived here." I smiled sadly. "Then she's waiting for you right where you left her." She didn't answer, just nodded, eyes glistening, and went upstairs. Later that night, I caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She was standing there in the dark, looking at herself, wiping away her makeup with the back of her hand. I didn't say anything, because the mirror was already speaking louder than I ever could. The next morning smelled like rain-soaked earth and black coffee. Avery was already outside, sitting on the porch steps wrapped in one of my old flannel shirts. She looked small again, but not weak, more like someone stripped down to the truth. When I stepped out, she didn't turn right away. "I dreamed we were back at the old county fair," she said quietly. "You bought me cotton candy, and I got sick on the Ferris wheel. You laughed and said, 'That's the price of wanting too much sugar.'" I smiled faintly. "Still true." She exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold air. "I think I finally get it now." "Get what?" "That I was chasing sweetness," she said, "but not substance. Mason, his parents, the parties, the jobs, they're all sugar. They melt when things get hard. I sat beside her. That's a hard lesson to learn, kid. She nodded slowly. It's worse realizing I made you the villain for trying to teach it. I didn't answer. I just let her words sit between us, heavy but honest, the kind that heals slow but deep. Finally, she said, Mason came by last night after you went to bed. He said he's done with his parents. He wants to start over somewhere else. Does he mean it? I asked. I think so. He looked scared though, like someone who just stepped off a ledge and hasn't hit the ground yet. Good, I said. Maybe he'll learn to land on his own 2 feet. She gave me a look somewhere between exasperation and amusement. You're impossible. Or maybe consistent, I said. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You know, when I told you that you weren't good enough to meet them, I didn't mean it. Not really. I was just afraid of losing the world I'd built. And now? I asked. She took a long breath. Now I'm afraid of losing you. That one cut deeper than any insult ever could. I didn't trust my voice, so I just put an arm around her and said, Then let's stop losing. The sky was gray, but somewhere behind the clouds, I could feel the sun trying to break through. A week passed before the dust began to settle. The headlines died down, the markets adjusted, and the Callahans, well, they went quiet. People like that always do when they realize bluster doesn't buy control. I didn't call anyone, didn't move any more pieces. I'd done enough. Now I just watched how everyone handled the aftermath. Mason came by again, alone this time. He looked rough, suit wrinkled, eyes sunken, the shine gone from his voice. Mr. Carter, he said, standing at the porch steps like a man on trial. I wanted to apologize. For what? I asked. Your father's arrogance or your silence? He flinched but didn't back down. Both. I nodded toward the porch chair. Sit. He did, nervously folding his hands. You were right, he said. About all of it. My family, they only see people as ladders. When the money started slipping, so did their affection. That's the danger with ladders, I said. They only stay steady if you don't look down. He gave a tired laugh. I don't know what happens next. I lost my position at the firm. My parents won't even take my calls. Good, I said. Now you're free to figure out who you are without them. He blinked, surprised by the lack of sympathy. And Avery? She's got her own figuring out to do, I said. But she's got a place to do it. You do too if you're man enough to earn it. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. You're not what I expected. No, I said. I'm what's left when expectations are gone. When he left, Avery came out from the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans. She'd been helping mend the fence line, dirt on her face, hair pulled back in a way that reminded me of when she was 12 and fearless. Did you scare him again? She teased. Maybe a little, I said. But he needed to hear it. So did I, she murmured. We stood there watching the fields, quiet except for the rustle of the grass. The land looked calm again, like it had forgiven us both. That night I realized something. Money can shake a man's world. But consequences, that's what rebuilds it. The next few days felt lighter, like the air itself had unclenched its fists. Avery stayed on the farm, helping with chores, cooking breakfast, walking barefoot in the dirt again. I hadn't seen her that free since she was 16. There was color in her cheeks again. Honest color. The kind that doesn't come from stress or makeup, but from being alive. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, she and I sat on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee that had gone cold. The horizon was painted gold, the sky streaked pink. It felt like time had stopped, like the world was giving us one last quiet apology. I keep thinking about everything, she said softly. The city, Mason's parents, the way I treated you. You don't have to explain, I said. I do, she insisted. I thought money meant safety, that if I could prove I belonged in their world, I'd finally be enough. But it's like chasing a finish line that keeps moving. I smiled faintly. That's the trick of it. They make you think you're running towards something when really, you're just running for them. She sighed, tucking her knees up on the chair. You must have seen it 100 times. I did, I said. And it cost me everything worth keeping. That's why I walked away. She turned to look at me. Do you ever regret it? Not once, I said. The money bought me time, but it didn't buy peace. That came later, after I stopped letting other people tell me what mattered. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think I understand now. Money can buy a house, but not a home. It can buy guests, but not friends. Comfort, but not rest." "Exactly," I said. "It can build walls higher than mountains, but not one bridge worth crossing." She smiled, soft, tired, real. "You sound like a preacher." I chuckled. "No, just a man who's seen what gold does when it gets too close to the heart." The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving only the sound of crickets and wind. She reached for my hand, fingers rough from work again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Even the hard parts." I squeezed her hand gently. "The hard parts are the real ones. They're what make the rest mean something." As the first stars appeared, I thought about how far we'd come. She didn't need the city anymore, and I didn't need to prove anything. We'd both been chasing things we already had, and finally, we'd stopped running. The night of the community dinner was the kind of evening that reminds you why you stay alive long enough to grow old. The sky stretched wide and soft, streaked with orange and violet. Avery had the idea, a celebration, she called it, though I knew it was really her way of saying thank you without the words. We set up tables under the oak trees, covered them in old checkered cloths, and let the smell of chili and cornbread drift through the air. Neighbors came from miles out, folks who'd helped when the barn roof collapsed, the nurse who once drove through a blizzard to bring me medicine, and a few new faces who'd heard there was free food and laughter worth sharing. Mason came too. No suit this time, just rolled-up sleeves and boots that still looked too clean for mud. He shook my hand, not like a man asking for approval, but like one trying to earn it. "Thank you," he said, "for not breaking me completely." I nodded. "You did that part yourself. I just made sure you noticed." He laughed, and for the first time it wasn't nervous. Avery moved between tables, smiling, laughing, carrying plates. Her dress wasn't city slick or designer. It was simple, soft blue, her hair tied back, cheeks glowing from the firelight. Every so often she'd glance at me and I'd see it, that unspoken peace between us, the kind that only comes when two people have finally stopped needing to be right. After everyone had eaten, she walked up with a small glass of sweet tea and sat across from me. The fire cracked low, throwing gold light across her face. "You were right," she said quietly, "about everything." I shook my head. "No, I was just older. That's not the same thing." She smiled. "I used to think love meant comfort. Now I know it means endurance." "Love's the only investment that pays in loss," I said. "But it's worth it." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to stay for a while. Help you around here. Maybe start something small. Teach the local kids, volunteer, build something that matters." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't have to ask." She looked toward the fields where the stars had begun to blink awake. "It feels like coming home." I nodded, too full to speak. As the night deepened, people began to leave, their laughter trailing off into the cool dark. I sat on the porch after everyone was gone, watching the last of the lanterns flicker out. Avery came and leaned against the doorframe beside me, arms folded. "You happy, Dad?" she asked softly. I thought about it for a long time. About all the years I'd spent building, losing, hiding, waiting. About how a man can be surrounded by riches and still starve for something simple and human. "Yeah," I said finally. "I am. Took me long enough." She smiled, then rested her head on my shoulder. We stayed like that, quiet, the world humming low and gentle around us. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and for once, I didn't care. The lesson was done. The test had been passed, not by me, but by her. And as the stars swayed above the old farmhouse, I realized something simple and absolute. A man can lose his fortune, his pride, his youth, but if he finds forgiveness, he's rich again. The end.